This tape with David Boren was made July 15, 1973, while he was a candidate for governor of Oklahoma.
Headliners, a discussion with people who make the news. Headliners is a public affairs presentation.
I'm Jay Lewis. My guest today on Headliners is David Boren of Seminole, state representative, and the first announced candidate for governor in 1974. David, good to have you on the show.
Thank you, Jay. Good to be with you.
First of all, why? Why did you announce for governor? You're relatively secure, a state representative, and you're fighting an incumbent, and as a Democrat. Why did you decide to take the plunge?
Well, I decided to take the plunge because there are some things that I'd like to see done in Oklahoma, and the best way I know to try to get them done is to run for governor and try to get in position to give some executive leadership in the right directions for Oklahoma. So it's a commitment on some of the issues that has caused me to run for governor.
How about support? Where does your basic support come from? And I guess that'll give us a clue as to what some of the issues are.
Well, it's a fairly broad-based support. I think that I would categorize the people who are most interested in my candidacy as those who don't have a particular axe to grind, but they're interested in opening up state government. Most of my support has come from some of the reforms that I've tried to push in the legislature in the past 2 or 3 years. I think younger voters have been attracted by my reform platform. All other voters have been attracted by my fights on economy and government, for example, opposing the purchase of the new airplane for the governor with $330,000 of revenue-sharing money, and some of the other stands that I've taken on the tax increases and other things.
Well, what are some of the issues that has created this attraction?
I think that the major overall issue that people are interested in now, and perhaps it's even more in the spotlight with Watergate on the national level and many of the scandals that have occurred on the state and local level as well, is the restoration of integrity and honesty to government. If I had to sum it up in just a few words, it's integrity in government. People are very concerned. They wonder if our system is really malfunctioning. They feel let down by the office holders. They're worried at the level of corruption, and they want to know what we can do about it, what we can do to bring back the standards of responsibility to government that we would like to see there.
If you'll pardon the side glance, every challenge candidate for public office that I've ever talked to in the past 7 years of political reporting has talked about bringing integrity to government, and many of these people have won, and yet the level of integrity hasn't risen greatly.
I think that that's true, and I think that it can't be a mere slogan, and of course I'm running on my legislative record. I'm not naive enough, even though I teach government at a college, and I'm sure that there's some people that think that all college professors are naive and in their ivory towers. Having been out there for 7 years and fought these battles, I have enough bruises that I've had some common sense knocked into my head. But I think that there are things that we can do, and there are things that I've tried to do in the legislature. You can't legislate honesty, but for example, we can make all of the legislative votes public record. And, you know, this was one of the things that I tried to do in the beginning of the session this year. The votes in the legislative committees, where 3/4 of all the action takes place, are not a matter of record. No records kept as to how an individual member votes. In the House, when we vote on amendments, and, you know, adding a not to a law can be very important, there's no record kept as to how individuals vote. And it's awfully easy for a member of the legislature or any public official to forget that he's there to represent the people, to be approached by special interest groups when he knows that the people back home are never going to have a record of what he's doing. And I think that we need to lay the cards on the table, make the system as open to the people as possible, and then the people themselves can act at least in part as their own watchdogs. And I think this will go a long way toward cleaning up government and making government more responsive to the will of the people again.
I recall back at the first of the session, you came out with your now famous and now dead Disclosure Act, requiring public officials to tell all about themselves financially. Why didn't that make it?
Well, I'll tell you what happened to that bill, and the bill required, as you said, all the public officials, members of the legislature, the governor, his staff, all to file a report each year and tell the people where they get their money other than from their state salaries. And I think the people have a right to know that. That bill was referred to the Rules Committee for study, And one member told me, he said, we're very fascinated with this proposal, and I said, good. And he said, we think it deserves a lot of study, and I said, that's great. And he said, we plan to study it until 1996, and I'm afraid that some of them would like to study it about that long, but this is a real irony, Jay. One of the things that happened was this. The Rules Committee met to consider my public disclosure bill in a closed-door secret session. They call it an executive session, and what that means is that the public can't come in, the voters who sent us there can't come in and listen, and you members of the news media are not allowed in. And in this closed-door meeting, they took action to kill, at least for this last year, my public disclosure bill. So here we had a public disclosure bill killed in a secret meeting.
And of course there's no record of who voted for it or
No,
against it.
absolutely no record. And this, no wonder the people get discouraged. Here it is, you try to pass a financial disclosure bill to protect their right to know, and not only does it not pass, they can't even find out who voted for it and who voted against it. And I don't think that's right. You know, we talk about government of the people, and no wonder the public is discouraged and feels like, why get involved in politics? I can't even get a record. How can I even vote intelligently? And so I asked for an Attorney General's opinion on this subject as to whether or not legislative committees could take votes in a closed-door session. And he ruled that they could under the state constitution. And I hope next year to push for a change. I'm going to push for it. I hope to get it passed. That will stop this practice. Stop the taking of votes in closed-door session. You know, that I helped write the open meeting law for the state of Oklahoma, and it forces school boards and city councils and other groups to take all their votes in open meeting. They can discuss personnel in private, they have some right to privacy to protect people's reputations, but they have to take all votes in public. And surely, if we make a city council or a school board take votes in public, the legislature, which spends a lot more of the taxpayers' money than any of these individual groups, they should have to vote in open session.
There are a couple of things that tie in there, and one of them is that every time a majority of the city council, for example in Seminole or in Oklahoma City or where else, gets together, they have to meet in public as long as there are enough of them to conduct business, according to your bill.
Right.
Except when they meet with the governor.
Well, I don't think that should be an exception either. I think that a meeting of that kind should be a public meeting, and I think even our party caucuses should be open meetings to the public. We're conducting public business, and you know, after all, when public business is conducted, it ought to be conducted in public. It's the people's government. That's what we're there for. We're employees of the people. I think a lot of us forget it. A lot of people in public office, they get to think about, this office belongs to me. You know, I'm the representative, and that office belongs to me, and I can do what I want with it. And that's not true. And of course, you know who's to blame for that? It's the people. The people have been so apathetic, and they haven't been involved in politics. And they've been sitting in the bleachers, and they've let their officials forget who they work for. So I think that if we're going to get good government again, our bosses, the people, those who elect us, they're going to have to start demanding some things from us, and they're going to have to get involved.
How about some of the other reform planks that you came out for this year? Governmental reorganization was one of your
Yes, I've pushed on that, and also in light of this, or along with it, of course, changing the policy on the investment of state funds, which has been one of my major causes for the last 3 years. I was one of 3 Democrats in the House that voted against giving the state treasurer the sole authority to handle state deposits. And I say this not in criticism of any individual person. I just didn't think that whoever the state treasurer might be, I didn't think one man should be able to hand out $550 million of taxpayers' money to banks in his own discretion. There's too much opportunity there for favoritism. So for the past 3 years, I have been fighting for a system of competitive bidding like they have in Illinois. Again, this goes back to, you can't legislate honesty, but you can sure put competition on a fair basis. Don't let someone hand out money to banks on a favoritism basis. Make all the banks bid competitively. Now, they do that in Illinois. You see, we got this money in at the first of the year, and some of the people have asked me, what is idle money? I didn't think we had any extra money. Well, it's not extra. It comes in the beginning of the year. We're going to spend it, say, on a teacher's salary in November, but it's only February. So what are we going to do with that money in the meantime? Well, we should draw interest on it. We do draw interest on some. How much interest do we draw? Well, we've drawn about 4% in the last 3 years. Illinois, where the banks have to bid on the money, they bid competitively, they get 6% on their money. Now, just 2% more on our money, 2% on $400 million that taxpayers pay, that's $8 million a year that we've lost in interest in Oklahoma this last year and the year before on the people's money. And, you know, beyond that, how much do we keep in our checking account not drawing interest? And this is really an interesting figure. In Illinois, for example, they keep only $7 million in their checking account at the end of a working day, draw interest on all the rest. In Oklahoma, we had $70 million in our checking account, not drawing interest. Now, the banks could be loaning some of that out for interest. They weren't paying any interest to the state. And
if I recall, Illinois has like 2.5 times the state budget of Oklahoma.
They have 16 times the budget. Yes, they have an $8 billion state budget. We have $500 million, and yet we're keeping 10 times as much in our checking account. Now, that doesn't make sense to me, and I haven't had anyone explain it to me. We've been giving away, if we'd collect interest on another $60 million and up our yield by 2%, we could get $10 to $11 million more on the people's money each year. And that's as much as the higher education budget increased. And you think about our tax increases, taxes have gone up, and yet here we sit by and let $10 or $11 million go down the drain each year. And I'm just not for that kind of practice.
Let's pause for just a minute to remind our listeners that this is Headliners. I'm Jay Lewis. My guest today is David Boren, recently announced candidate for governor. On the state treasurer item, that resolution that came up, you were in the same ballpark as Jim Inhofe of Tulsa, and oddly enough, it could turn out eventually that you're running against him for governor. That could be the way it runs.
This could happen, and
that's,
you know,
one issue eliminated.
That's true. Jim and I have talked about this. Senator Garrison, another Republican who's mentioned for governor, has co-authored a number of bills with me. There's several of the candidates, other than the present governor, that we've shared proposals together. And of course, all we could say on state deposits, if we both got into the race, is, well, we agree with each other on that. Because, you know, one of the things I think that's wrong, and of course, I'm a Democrat, and I'm very proud of my party affiliation, and my dad was a Democratic congressman before me, and my granddad, and I suppose if I'd turned up a Republican, I would have been driven out of my household, probably at an early age. But, you know, we have to get away from thinking in terms of Democrats or Republicans when we're talking about the people's business and handling the people's money. And these good government issues, they stretch across party lines, and they should.
Well, now, the depository of state funds, without getting into guilt or innocence or personalities or anything else, do you think that the whole question of Leo Winter's guilt or innocence would ever have come up if he had had some guidelines to follow on depositing money?
No, I think that, and I made this comment in the legislature one day to some of those who were close friends of Leo Winters, and let me make this clear, he and I, on a personal basis, have never had any problems or disputes. There's no personal ill will between Leo Winters and myself. It's just a matter of policy. I told them and I told him, I think that if we had a policy set by the legislature for the impartial investment of the people's money to get the maximum return, rule out any favoritism for individual banks, we'd be doing Leo Winters a favor. And I really think so. The legislature and the governor should have acted to do something about it. And I've had bills the last 3 years. This year, I even got up on the floor of the House and moved to bring my bill out of committee over the objections of the committee. And, you know, that's a pretty drastic step. I got 36 votes to do that, both the Republican and Democratic side of the aisle. I wrote to the governor and I asked him to help me get support for this bill to limit the amount in our non-interest bearing accounts. I didn't get this support, and that's another one of the reasons why I'm running. I think that we need some leadership for some changes like this in Oklahoma.
Well, let's get to the current governor, David Hall. What do you find wrong with what he's been doing? Obviously, there's something.
Well, many things, and again, this isn't a personal feud between the present governor and myself, because we have been personal friends in the past. I was one of his supporters when he ran, even worked on his announcement speech a little bit. And I have no personal grudge against the governor. We just disagree. I think, for example, that we could do a lot better job of setting priorities and spending the people's money. I just don't think that we should be spending revenue-sharing money on airplanes and this kind of thing when we can't afford an adequate penal system, for example. have a psychiatrist just half a day a week at McAllister. And, I'm not soft on crime, but if you just look at it this way, these people are coming out of that prison, and they're going to come back and live in our communities again. Do we want them to come out trained and with psychological help so they won't commit crimes again, or do we want them coming back out more dangerous than when they went in? We have all these pressing needs in Oklahoma, and I think we have to set some priorities. So I've disagreed with that. I've also disagreed with what I look at as the pretty loose way in which things have happened. There's been a lot of corruption in the administration, and while I'm not asserting that the governor is personally responsible, yet he must be responsible for his appointees. He appointed them, he put them in office. We've had things like the Industrial Development Department scandal, this several $1,000s for this worthless study by a non-existent corporation, just so many things that have come, travel claims, free office space, using the governor's staff for political polling. This sort of thing I simply think has no place. We've got to get over this idea of politics as usual. Sometimes people tell me, well, politics has always been corrupt, that's just the way it is. Well, we can't put up with that anymore in Oklahoma or nationally, and we're going to have to quit tolerating it. And then we've disagreed on architects' contracts. I favor the rotation of architectural contracts among qualified firms, like the Army Corps of Engineers.
You mean among Hudgens and Thompson and Ball?
No, sir. I didn't want to mention any individual firm, but of course, you know that firm allegedly has received a large share of the state contracts. I'm sure they're a well-qualified firm, and I think they're entitled to their share, but not more than their share. I think there are many other qualified firms. You see, we don't have competitive bidding for architects because they're like lawyers. They get a flat fee, like 5%. So there's no competitive bidding. So the governor and his appointees can award these contracts at their own discretion. And this runs into the millions of dollars, from 1971 to 72, with very little increase in construction. The highway department upped its architectural fees from a little over $200,000 to a little over $1,700,000 in 1 year. Not many more roads, but they're a lot better planned. And when you're talking about handing out contracts running in the millions of dollars at your own discretion, that's just an open invitation to hand them out in return for contributions and political favors. And I'm just not for it. I try to do something about it this year. I think we ought to rotate these contracts on a fair basis. A study was made of the Board of Affairs, for example. They found that there were almost 70 architects firms in Oklahoma City alone that they didn't even have files on. Apparently they didn't even know they existed out there, and they're supposed to have qualifications and rotate these contracts, and they're not doing it. So there are just a host of issues. One more I might mention, and I mentioned it in my announcement speech, I object to the tone of the present governor's administration in some ways. For example, I don't like the use of the term fat cat to refer to taxpayers. And we all thought that meant wealthy people until tax time came. We found out it was the average person who worked for a living turned out to be a fat cat. And I don't think people mind paying taxes. They know they have to pay for good schools, and I think they're willing to. And if they know the money's going to be well spent, they're willing to pay taxes. But I don't think we ought to insult the taxpayers, and I don't think we ought to try to pit rich against poor or any one group against another in Oklahoma. We have to build the kind of climate that will encourage business to come to the state.
I don't want to get into internal matters within state government that are really of no concern to the people. But there has been an apparent, at first it was a suspected rift between the governor and the legislature. Then it became an apparent rift.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's an obvious rift. Not only the Republicans, but many of the Democrats out there have expressed to us that they really don't trust what the governor's doing. Now, I don't know whether that's true or not, but indications are that there is some validity to it.
Well, I'm sure that it varies. I think that there's more opposition to the governor in the state Senate than there is in the state House. The House leadership has been more favorable and friendly to the governor, but I would say this, from the number of legislators who have privately contacted me to help me in my campaign, and I say privately because, they have to serve another year in the legislature and get things for their own districts. It's been very encouraging to me, and I would say that I know personally a number who must not be for the governor because they're already helping me in the race.
Speaking of having to serve another year on trying to get things for their districts. This is going to be an awfully long gubernatorial campaign if you're announcing now.
It is, and it's going to be difficult in the next session of the legislature. I know that. I hope that those who are for me and against me in the legislature, and of course the governor himself, I'm just hoping that they will be fair enough to look at the needs of my district and put them beyond my own personality as to whether or not they like David Boren and do what's best for the people. And I believe most of the members of the legislature are willing to do that. I am starting early, but I have to. I'm not going to be very well financed. In fact, not well at all financed. I'm sort of opening up on faith and starting a campaign on faith that small donations will come in. And so I have to start early, and I have to try to outwork and out-organize the present governor.
Do you have any major financial backing at this time?
Not really what you could call major, no. Our contributions have come in, my announcement programs, some polling that I've done, and paying for the opening of my headquarters. It came in mainly from Seminole County, this early money from my home district. And the people of my home district raised $1 at a time, really. It was almost like a Red Cross drive down there. People went out just literally door to door, and some 800 people in my county have already sent me contributions. Ranging from $10 to $100, and that's where the money came from that got me off the ground. And I just don't know. I hear about these large donations taking place, you know, and you hear about the $500,000 that the governor's supposed to have, and you watch the Watergate hearings and you read about thousands of dollars in little black bags, but no one's delivered any of that to my headquarters as yet.
Well, now speaking of that $500,000 the governor's supposed to have, at last count I heard it was $350,000, but who knows? Do you think that ought to be reported?
I most certainly do, and I'm pledging in this campaign. I don't have a hard time keeping a record of my contributions. As I say, they're not very many of them, but I'm keeping them all written down in a little cash book and a record of my expenditures. And I intend to open this to the public all the way through the campaign. I think that's what ought to be done, and I'm going to challenge the governor in due time to do the same thing. You know, Oklahoma law has a big loophole in it now. It says only money raised after the filing period has to be reported. Well, this means that all the money raised this year, including however much money he's already raised, and others may have raised, doesn't have to be reported. And I think that's wrong. We're just asking for a major scandal in Oklahoma. But you see, the whole Watergate thing, the amount of money involved was approximately $1 million that was supposed to have been in the safe in Washington. And we're talking about a third or half that much just here in Oklahoma that supposedly has been raised already.
Well, now we're getting to the point that financial disclosure laws seem to be inherently more full of loopholes than they are solid ground anyway. If you don't want to report a $5,000 contribution from the Associated Goat Producers, for example, how would I force you to do so?
Well, yeah, I suppose you really couldn't force me to do it, although if it were the law and I didn't report it, and you know, the General Accounting Office, for example, on the federal level, and others, the FBI, who are now empowered to check violations of federal campaign law, if we had such a law in Oklahoma, people are getting pretty adept at finding this, especially if you spend it. If you keep it in a shoebox in your backyard, I suppose it'd never be found, but you can get caught. And I think, of course, any law, people are going to try to find loopholes, they're going to try to get around it, and they're not foolproof. But I think the more we move in that direction, and people being afraid of getting caught as they are, the better chance we'll have of having full disclosure.
In this particular campaign against David Hall, would you have announced your candidacy had there not been the industrial development scandal and the various appointments that turned out to be not quite what they were represented to be, and the various other things that have tended to rock the Hall administration, like the Frizzell thing at the Real Estate Commission?
Oh, I'm not sure. You can't say what you would have done. All of these things have been factors. You look at the total record of his administration, of course that's been part of it, and it has to be weighed by the people. But I might well have run anyway, because I'm not really running so much against David Hall as I am running for governor. I'm running on the basis of these positive proposals that I want to see carried out: rotation of contracts, record voting, public disclosure, priorities in spending. And I'm running for these things. And I think I might well have tried it anyway, because I think that these are issues that the people need to wake up. I think the people need to understand about these issues, and most of the people don't seem to know about them. They don't know that they don't have the votes in the legislature. They don't know how the state deposits are being handled. And I suppose that the best way to bring something to the public attention is to get in a campaign and make it a campaign issue. And it sounds kind of corny to say it, but you feel some sense of obligation to carry these issues to the people.
You were the original author of the death penalty bill, and yet you are you take the opposite view of most people who seem to favor it, in that you want more rehabilitation rather than confinement at the state prison. Those who have supported it seem to want a harder line on confinement. How do you reconcile the two views?
Well, I don't think they're inconsistent at all. And as I say, I don't know. Some people have asked me, are you a liberal or a conservative? And I'm sure that many people think I'm an arch conservative, and other people think that I'm a liberal. To me, it's just a common sense approach. Now, the death penalty across the board doesn't deter crime. You know, many crimes are committed in the heat of passion, family feuds. We hate to admit it, but that's the main cause of murders, family feuds. And someone getting ready to shoot his wife, or the wife getting ready to shoot her husband, the death penalty bill, they won't stop and think about it anyway. They'll go ahead and do it. But there are certain circumstances, like kidnapping, life imprisonment if I kill my victim, you know, and don't leave a witness, life imprisonment if I don't. Well, the obvious thing there, and it happened in the Howard Seiler murder case. I was Mrs. Seiler, the mother of Howard Seiler, is a close friend of our family in Seminole, and you remember there was some testimony there. Why leave a witness? You're going to get life imprisonment either way. Why leave a witness to identify you? So I think there's some conditions in which the death penalty will act as a deterrent, and I think that in those conditions, we needed to try to impose it. On the other hand, rehabilitation, if you're against crime, you want to deter crime, you see. You go for things like death penalty in the right situation, and then you go for rehabilitation, because, as I said, those people are coming out of that prison. You know, after 2 or 3 years, they serve their sentence, they're coming out. And they're going to come back, and they're going to live in Oklahoma City, and they're going to live in the Village, and they're going to live in McAllister or Ada or Enid or other towns. And I would just much rather have them in a situation where they're trained for a job, they have a job, they've reestablished contact with their family, they have money in the bank, they've had psychological help if they needed it, because they're not going to commit crimes when they come back. They're not going to go crawling through my back door some night and try to knock me in the head. And so I think it just sounds good sense to try to rehabilitate them, as well as humane.
Of course, there are probably some district attorneys among us who would call you all sorts of names for that, saying that really what we need to do is send them down there for the rest of their life, lock them up, and keep them away. You don't think then that long sentences help?
Long sentences hurt, because people are kept behind bars for a long period of time. If they ever do come out, they're much worse off. They're completely unable to adjust to society. And really, I don't think the taxpayers want that either. You know, it costs about $6 a day. It sure wouldn't be worth it. I'd hate to pay $6 a day to stay in the prison at McAllister. But having been down there to look it over, I hasten to say, not under sentence, but I don't think the taxpayers want to send people down there and foot the bill for them for the rest of their lives. It'd be a lot better, rehabilitate them, get them out, make them taxpayers themselves, get them gainfully employed, help share the tax burden instead of keeping them down there under room and board and lock and key at the taxpayer's expense. So I think that old attitude's fading.
We've got about 15 seconds left. What kind of chance do you have really in the Democratic primary?
I think a very good chance. We've taken a poll which shows I have a good chance, and I've been around the state talking with the people, and their response to me convinces me this is a year they're going to get involved, the people again, and take their government back, and I think there's a very enthusiastic response, and I think I have a very good chance.
Thank you very much. David Boren of Seminole, state representative and now an announced candidate, the first such candidate for governor of the state of Oklahoma. That's been Headliners. Thank you for listening.
Headliners, a discussion with people who make the news, has been a public affairs presentation. This program was pre-recorded.